astrology has changed over time. It is not the same as it was anciently. And there have been different rulership systems, different ways of applying the information. What if, as humanity is changing and as humanity is awakening more to feminine energy once again, what if there's also going to be a new way of looking at astrology?
Welcome to the Feminine Alchemy Podcast, where we explore the truth about the feminine, the peaceful, the wild, and the visceral. I'm your host, J.N. Behringer, joined by my co-hosts, Julie Dean Richards and Kayelee Rose. Each week, we explore the deep mysteries of the feminine and help listeners apply them to their daily lives in a practical way. Join us to unlock the hidden wisdoms your soul has been waiting for.
Tell everyone our podcast won an award.
Thank you to Wolf Media Festival for naming Feminine Alchemy as the #1 podcast in social and cultural podcasts in the month of December 2024. You can join us at the Wolf Media Festival April 18th. We'd love to see you there. It's in Melbourne, Florida. And thank you so much for listening and making us culturally and socially relevant.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Feminine Alchemy. Today is such a special episode. Although our co-host Jayanne is not with us today, we have a very special guest. It's Kayelee. She's our guest, Kayelee Rose. This is actually Kaylee's very special birthday episode. So if you're listening to this, tell Kayelee happy birthday. It's a great birthday, and we're going to learn so much more about her today and her special project called Resonant Astrology and how amazing it is. But first, I do have to ask Kayelee in our opening question. We also have news. I wish Jayanne was here for this because she is good at the news thing, but we need to tell everyone our podcast won an award.
Oh, yes. Yeah, that was such a pleasant surprise. It was just like, oh my gosh, how did this come into being? But yeah, no, so exciting.
Yeah, Wolf Media, they chose us as the best cultural and social podcast. So that was really amazing. And we will get to go to their media festival. They invited us. We're going to go on their podcast. And we are now a nominee for an even bigger award. So thank you, everyone. I'm like,
what?
That's yes, exciting. Yeah. Yes, we're on their website even. You can look up Wolf Media. They have us as a nominee on their website. So it's very exciting. And I'm excited to do our podcast in front of a live audience. And yeah, so everybody, I want to be like, vote for us, but there is no voting. It is only judges. But we were so excited. We are now an award-winning podcast, everyone. You're listening to an award-winning podcast. And yay! For our first question, yay! For our podcast, I would like to ask Kayelee about when was your favorite birthday? Since it's your birthday, it's a birthday episode. We got to ask you about any favorite birthdays or memorable ones.
So I remember my 10th birthday because I was just so excited to be double digits. It was the first double digit birthday, and for some reason that was the biggest deal ever in my mind. And I just felt so special and so like I've really arrived as a 10-year-old. But let's see. More recently, was it my last birthday or the one before? Anyway, I told my husband, I was like, for my birthday, I just really want to have like a hot cocoa bar where like people come and visit me. Like they don't have to all be there at once because that gets overwhelming, but like an open house where there's all these hot chocolate ingredients and add-ins, and they just drink hot chocolate and they hang out with me. And it was the best. Because he took me to the store and I got to pick all my favorite like hot chocolate add-ins and ones that I thought other people would like. And we made homemade whipped cream and like it was great. And then people came, and because it was open house style, I don't know if it's come across yet. I'm a bit of an introvert and I get a little overwhelmed when there are a ton of people. And so just to have a few people here and there, I actually got to talk to everyone who came to my birthday party instead of it just being like, hey, how's it going? Like there was more depth, which was perfect. And I have always loved hot chocolate. So that is definitely one of my more favorite birthdays.
Oh, I love it. That's a great birthday to have. And that's a perfect introductory question. I love the idea of an open house. I did have a hot chocolate bar for like my bachelorette party. We did like a hot chocolate. Yeah, it was very fun. So I'm a big fan of that. I'm glad that you had so much fun. I am excited to celebrate this birthday with you. So that will be so fun. Do you want to tell people how old you're turning?
As soon as I remember how old I'm turning. 35. I'm turning 35. I forget
Oh,
how old I am all the time, so just had to check in.
well, it's a big one. It's a very big one. So,
Yeah.
today we're going to talk about something near and dear to your heart, a project you've been working on for a long time and that you have, come to over time. And for people who don't know, Kayelee is an excellent researcher, and she is very brilliant when it comes to digging down into astrology. She's actually taken classes from Kepler, which people listening probably don't know what that is, but it's a very prestigious astrology school. It's like number one. Everyone thinks Kepler's the best. So she's actually taken classes there, but she's been forming her own astrology that centers the feminine a little bit more, and she calls it Resonant Astrology. And today we're going to talk a little bit about it, why it came to her, what it is, and some elements of it that are new and unique. So I'm thinking maybe we should just start with like, why was this important to you? How did you come across this type of astrology? Like, how did you come up with these ideas? And just tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, absolutely. So my journey with astrology in general, I would say, started in earnest in 2018, and I just dove in and really learned to see things um, in a highly symbolic way. Astrology is a very symbolic language, as you know, and just being able to see things from a simultaneously more broad perspective and more deep perspective was so incredibly valuable for me. And I had so many like massive breakthroughs on a personal level and in my relationships and even in my connection to God. It felt like astrology was a tool for understanding how God speaks to me. And as I went through multiple different experiences that were incredibly challenging over the next few years, I started having more of a relationship and more of a connection with the concept of female deity, the idea of a heavenly mother. And I'd always had her in my mind from even as a child, this idea, like with my religious background, it was a given. Yeah, there's a heavenly mother, but we didn't know a lot about her. And as I reconnected with my own feminine energy more and more, I was also reconnecting with her more and more. And as she began to influence so much of my life, she started influencing how I saw astrology. And when I looked at astrology, I realized that there's so much there, so many beautiful things, and so many of the symbols are very masculine. They're male gods, male patterns, and that all of the feminine energy was supposed to be encapsulated by the moon and Venus, and then asteroid goddesses who didn't necessarily get a lot of coverage, depending on who you were talking to in the astrological community. And that did not feel right to me. It just did not feel right at all. And I was like, okay, well, astrology has changed over time. It is not the same as it was anciently. And there have been different rulership systems, different ways of applying the information. What if, as humanity is changing and as humanity is awakening more to feminine energy once again, what if there's also going to be a new way of looking at astrology? And I remember kind of praying about it and pondering one evening, and just having this very strong sense of, yeah, Kayelee, you're absolutely right. There is more to this. And just being so excited about that idea. And then over the following weeks and months, I kept being led to research the asteroid goddesses more in depth, and research traditional rulership and modern rulership and the differences. And like, okay, why is Pluto in modern rulership considered the ruler of Scorpio when Mars was the classical ruler of Scorpio? And what's the overlap there, and what's the significance? Because Mars as the ruler of Scorpio still has significance depending on how you're applying information, but Pluto as the ruler of Scorpio has even more information. Like, it's a new way to look at things, and a more nuanced, more complete way to look at things. And so it was kind of funny. I remember waking up one night and just not being able to go back to sleep, and just having idea after idea after idea fall into my head. It just felt like this divine download of like, okay, but what about this asteroid goddess? And what about this house? And what about this sign? And what about this? And so I started like frantically typing it in my phone, in like a Google Doc or something. And that's kind of how everything that I now utilize in my work as an astrologer started coming through. Is that I was like, okay, God would give me some guidance, and then I'd go do some research, and then he would give me even more guidance, and the Heavenly Mother would chip in. And it I do not claim resonant astrology as my own creation. I feel more like I'm just this conduit, and it's coming through, and it's this gift. And so with resonant astrology, the whole, I guess, purpose behind it is to bring the feminine into balance with the masculine, because the way that astrology is set up, it's not an intentional thing, I don't think, but it can start to push feminine energies kind of to the back and make them seem maybe not quite as important, and not have as much of a voice at the table as the more masculine energies. Let's see, I've lost track of what your question even was. So did I answer it?
No, that's a great start. So to reflect back to you what you said, you don't feel like this is yours, but you feel like it's coming through you, and that you've been divinely inspired by this. You have had help from Heavenly Father, Heavenly Mother, bringing all of this into fruition. And the point of resonant astrology is to bring the feminine into balance with the masculine. Is
Yes,
that
absolutely.
okay? That's awesome. I'm saying this, I'm like, I know, because I've made you tell me so much about it. But but I do want to ask two questions what kept coming to mind when we're talking about this. Why the name resonant astrology is the first question, and then I'll ask you something else after that.
Okay. Yeah. So when the bulk of this information was coming forward for me, I kept thinking like, oh, what do I call this? Like, what's a fitting name? And I kind of brainstormed for a while, and nothing quite seemed right. And then I went back to, I have a lot of musical training, a vocal training, a musical background. And I kept coming back to this idea of resonance, and how when a sound, a choir, a voice is resonating, um, it's all of the different all of the notes are present. They're all being heard. Like, if something's truly resonant, you've got the highs and you've got the lows and you've got stuff in between. And for me, it felt like astrology had a lot of the low notes, but maybe it was missing some of those higher notes. And that resonant astrology is bringing it all into this beautiful, like, harmonious, like, full sound. It's all of the voices, all of them are present, instead of some of them being too quiet or too hidden for us to notice most of the time. And eventually I was like, is this what I run with? And it was kind of like God told me, it's great, go for it. Like, the name doesn't matter so much as the information. And I was like, okay, we'll call it this, unless something better comes along. So that's where resonant astrology came from.
I love that. I love the idea of harmonies and notes resonating together and everybody, coming together. And it's so interesting because if you've ever sung in a choir, when notes are off key or if you can't hear the right note, the whole sound is thrown off. So I love this idea of resonating together, making it whole and bringing beautiful things into it. So that is super beautiful. And I wanted to ask you a little bit more, if we could dig a little bit more into like the specifics. So I think the first thing we probably should do is explain rulership to people because they probably don't know what rulership is. So what is rulership, Kayelee?
So rulership is essentially, there are certain planets that it's kind of like they're in charge of or very connected to the energy of a sign and a house. It's like that's their domicile. That's where they feel the most comfortable, and that's where the energy is most like their own, even though house and sign are not identical in energy to that planet. And so there are, I was going to say 3 rulership systems, but that includes resonant astrology. There are 2 main rulership systems that I'm aware of. Maybe there are more. And there's the, I guess, classical or traditional rulership, which was based on the idea that there were only so many planets that they even knew existed. So they gave rulership to those planets. And so you had like Mars ruling 2 different signs and houses, and Venus ruling 2 different signs and houses, and Jupiter and Saturn, and then the sun and the moon each ruled a sign and a house. But as astronomers discovered more planets, astrologers started seeing how those planets related to the energies playing out on Earth and in our lives. And then you get to the point where there's this modern rulership where some of those more distant planets like Neptune and Uranus and Pluto, they take over rulership in the modern system from some of those duplicated rulers.
Yeah, I think that's a great explanation. And just so people know exactly what Kayelee said, before in traditional rulership, it was every planet rules 2 signs except the sun and the moon, each rule 1, which is important in some other astrological techniques and things like that. But most astrologers now use modern rulership techniques. And so this is really important. The reason this is important is because you use rulers to help you connect what's going on in someone's life, what's going on. It helps you to connect houses together, and it helps you to connect like the pieces of your life and how those are flowing together. Like, what does this flow look like? So rulership is actually really important when you get into like deep astrology and have an astrologer who's really, digging into you rather than just like, oh, Pluto is in Aries, which means X, Y, and Z, or like, just saying that. It goes much beyond that. So rulership is actually quite important, and it places a planet in importance as well. And so resonant astrology, changing that rulership, changes and elevates planets. And so something I wanted to bring up is I love that you've elevated a lot of the goddesses the asteroid goddesses, because I know so many astrologers who are like, oh, I don't really count this aspect pattern if there is an asteroid goddess in it. Like, I don't really count this thing if there's a point. I only count it if it's the main 7 planets. And so, but if we look at something like Pluto, because a lot of people say like, well, they're too small to like matter or something like that. But if you look at Pluto, right, like some of these asteroids are like the size of Pluto, they're as big, and they're maybe even closer to us.
Yes.
Yeah. And so Pluto, right, even though he's far, so for people who don't know, Pluto is really considered in modern astrology like one of the most powerful planets there is. Like, he marks power and shows a lot of power and shows what's going on, transformation. He's a big deal. So I don't think the size necessarily shows how important a planet or an asteroid is. He can be far away, he can still have big impacts on our life and society. So just for people listening, like, this is a big deal to elevate these asteroid goddesses. Hey friends, it's Julie. I'm just popping in here real quick to tell you about a very special invitation we have for you. If you have been feeling deeply called to learn more about your feminine identity or to see what feminine power really is, or you're just loving the podcast, then Kayelee and I would love to invite you to join our community, Feminine Alchemist. Inside, we host live monthly women's circles, challenges, and Wheel of the Year celebrations. They are seriously so much fun. We have monthly workshops where we bring in experts to teach on anything from menstruation to mythology. You'll also get access to our library of courses about astrology, intuition techniques, sacred embodiment, and cyclical living. And most importantly, you'll be able to connect with women who are like-hearted and walking the same path as you. So if this sounds exciting to you, join today by clicking the link in the show notes or going to femininealchemist.com. That's alchemist spelled M-Y-S-T. Okay, back to the episode. So let's get more into that. So what have you done with this rulership? If you don't mind talking about it,
Yeah,
so
no,
people can understand.
I don't mind. But really quickly before I touch on that, can I just give like a really quick example of like why rulership matters to kind
Yeah,
of go along
totally.
with what you were describing? So say someone, say you're having issues with your communication. You're just really, really struggling to communicate with other people. And you have maybe for a long time, and you're like, why am I having such a hard time? Most people say, hey, well, look at your Mercury, because Mercury is very connected to communication. But if you look at what sign your Mercury is in, say your Mercury is in Cancer, for Mercury to do his job, he has to talk to the ruler of Cancer, which in modern rulership, well, and traditional rulership would be the moon. And so for Mercury to do his job, it's kind of like he looks to the moon and says, hey, how should I do this? And then you go look at your moon. Where is your moon placed? What house is it in? What sign is it in? What is it experiencing? And then how your moon is experiencing things can give you insight into the best way to approach your Mercury energy, including your communication. So that's one way that rulership is like really valuable.
Yeah, it's incredibly, incredibly helpful. And when I do career stuff with people, it really matters. It matters a ton because not only are we, because the 10th house, for people who don't know, the 10th house rules your career. It's your reputation. It's the brightest part of the chart, the most visible part because it's up at the top. And so people will look at the 10th house and say, oh, this is all the information about your career we have. And it's like, no, 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 no. This is only the beginning, right, of the information. There's so much more. And so when I look at someone's career, I'm connecting these houses by saying, okay, who rules? Like, let's say like you have Leo in your 10th house. Okay, well, then we got to find your sun. We got to go look what house is your sun in. Okay, well, then what house is ruling? Who's ruling the house that your sun's in? We got to connect that. We got to connect. So you go through and you connect until you find what's called a final dispositor, which is the last planet that is basically in its rulership. So like, let's say Venus is in charge of Taurus. So let's say it ends up that you get to Venus and she's in Taurus. Well, that's your final dispositor because we don't move anywhere because she's in rulership. This is maybe too complicated for people, but basically you bounce until you can't bounce anymore. And that connects those threads together. And it's a much deeper way of looking at people's charts. So it's really, really important. Sorry, just had to say that,
Oh,
Kayelee.
you're just fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's great.
Yep. So keep going. So what have you done with rulership? Where have you switched things out? Why, give us the juice.
Okay. So there were two big questions that kept coming up for me as I was co-collaborating with God. And one of those was why why do the sun and the moon, why are they connected to Leo and Cancer and then the fourth and the fifth houses? That seems like a lot of pressure on those signs and houses because the sun and the moon are the luminaries. Like they're a big deal. And then my other question was like, okay, we still have Venus ruling two signs and we still have Mercury ruling two signs. And like, how does that tie into this idea that keeps coming back to me, that there needs to be more representation of feminine energy and also feminine symbols in the form of actual like goddesses as opposed to gods. And the first thing that came up was, well, Venus only rules Taurus in this system. I was like, okay, I can sit with that. That makes a lot of sense to me. But then I was like, okay, but what about Libra? Because honestly, as I learned about astrology, Libra never quite felt right to be connected to Venus. It felt almost like it was well, it's got to go somewhere. So we'll say Venus is connected to this. It just never sat right with me. And then God was like, well, what about Juno? And I was like, oh my gosh, Juno! Juno is perfect. Juno is Libra energy, because Juno is connected to marriage and to partnership, but also connected to this idea of fairness. And there's a little bit of this intellectual quality that Venus doesn't really have. Venus is not intellectual, not saying Venus is stupid, but there's this in the head energy that Venus lacks that Juno has. And so Libra is an air sign, and that seventh house that Libra is connected to is the house of marriage, but also the house of partnership and legality in those things. So there is a love element, but there's also a, hey, you made this commitment and you're going to be held to it kind of energy. And that's so Juno, so very Juno. Because in case you're unfamiliar, those of you listening, with Juno mythology, Juno is Hera. Juno is the wife of Jupiter, or the wife of Zeus if we're talking Greek mythology. And she was not into her husband breaking his marriage vows and having intimate relationships with other women, or men for that matter. And she would seek vengeance. And she also was a protector of women and a protector of things like childbirth. And she would utilize legal technicalities and contracts and things like that to protect women. And that just seemed so incredibly perfect for a planet that would be in charge of Libra energy and seventh house energy. And that's like where it all started, was that Libra Juno connection. Because after that, I was like, okay, well, if there's an asteroid goddess in rulership, are there any other asteroid goddesses in rulership?
And can I say something really quick? Just interject really quickly. Because just so everyone knows, we will, as Kayelee goes through and talks about rulership, we'll talk a little bit about each of these asteroid goddesses so you can understand why they're there, just like she did with Juno. But hang tight, because in the coming weeks, we're going to have a whole series on all the asteroid goddesses. So if you're unfamiliar with them, we will be going in depth about them. And I wanted to say about Juno, because we've talked about this deeply. I got like full body chills when you were talking about that and the partnership piece. Because Juno really is exactly like what you said, that for people who don't know. So I guess maybe what we should do as we go through is explain the sign and the house and then the asteroid goddess and kind of like connect that. So yes, the seventh house, it does have to do with legalities in partnership and marriage. And Juno, exactly like you said, she's all about marriage. She is the wife, right? Like she is the wife who stays faithful. She is very incredibly smart and intelligent. She uses the law, and the seventh house is very connected to the law. It's connected to balance and justice. And that's what Juno gives. She brings justice to people. She's very intricate in that. And I'm getting like chills again. But for me, this is a very important planet. And Kayelee knows why, because I have Juno in my 10th house on my midheaven. So what that means is she's an inextricably connected to my career and to my legacy and everything that I do. And part of that has been a little bit manifest in my partner, my husband, working with us and working with me and all of that kind of stuff. But also when I looked at it at first, And she also is a big part of my second house. My second house is connected to her in the 12th house. Anyway, she shows up a ton. She is a huge part of my chart, and I didn't know very much about her. And I was sad for a little while because I kept thinking about her in conjunction with the law whenever I would see it. The law and partnership. She also does a lot with money. So similar to Venus in that aspect that she has to do with money and things like that. But I kept thinking like, oh, I'll only make money being a lawyer, like I'll only be able to do lawyer things. And like, what about all this stuff I want to do with the feminine and partnership? And Kayelee was like, oh no, Julie, no. Listen, Juno is actually about the protector of women, and she uses the law to protect women, and she's very intricately woven into the feminine. And Kayelee even gave me a Juno necklace, and which I love. I wear it quite often, even though I'm wearing my moon necklace. We also have matching necklaces, you guys, because we're so great.
I have to wear mine today, but
oh, we have our moon. Yes, we love our matching moon necklaces that we have. But so it just has meant so much to me as I've learned more about her and dug into it and used her in my chart and looked at where she was and used her as the ruler, just as a testimony to what Kaylee's talking about. Like, it works. This kind of astrology really does resonate, and it's super powerful for me. So I love that that's your first, okay, who should we put where? Like, I love that she's that big piece. So keep going. Who is the next piece? What else comes in?
All right. So then next, I kept pondering the sixth house and Virgo, because they're ruled by Mercury in modern and traditional astrology. And I was like, okay, if every planet needs just one sign and one house, Mercury's next. Like, okay, what replaces Mercury? And I thought about the different asteroid goddesses and was like, well, maybe it could be Chiron, but no, it feels like it needs to be female. It needs to be a goddess, not a male entity. And I kicked around the idea of Hygieia, and I kicked around the idea of Vesta, and I was just like, I don't know. Like, and why do just two asteroid goddesses get rulership? And I didn't actually receive the answer for the ruler of Virgo and the sixth house until I started looking at the fourth and fifth houses that are ruled by the moon and the sun. And I was like, just sitting one day, and all of a sudden it popped into my head, what if the sun and the moon weren't in rulership of a sign or a house? And it was like, what? That's possible? And then I was like, well, of course that's possible. It's always felt like there's so much pressure on Leo and Cancer and the fifth house and the fourth house because of those luminaries there. And so then I asked myself, like, okay, what do the sun and the moon, like, what purpose do they serve? Besides, like, I mean, they're very connected to identity and inner world, and they make up a huge part of a person's personality and how they approach the world. But like, if they're taken out of rulership, do they still rule something? And then it just came very, very clearly, well, they rule masculine and feminine energy. And so I got that in this system of astrology, the moon is the ruler of all feminine energy, including the signs that are considered feminine. And the sun is the ruler of all masculine energy, including the signs that are considered masculine, regardless of whether they're ruled by a feminine planet. So some of the signs are considered masculine or feminine, but are ruled by a planet that is considered the opposite. But that doesn't play into whether or not the sun or the moon rules. There's just this like potency in this idea that all feminine energies, all yin energies, all receptive, intuitive, maybe a little bit veiled sometimes energies are connected to the moon. And if you want any information about any part of your chart that is feminine, the moon is the ultimate place to go. And the opposite is true of the sun when it comes to masculine energies. And so suddenly the sun and the moon became vitally important for any work around balancing someone's masculine and feminine energy inside themselves. And And I realized, like, oh, wow, this explains so much because my sun and my moon are basically on top of each other. Like, it just explained so many things for me about my relationships to masculine and feminine energy, and how sometimes they feel so together that I like can't quite tell them apart.
Mhm.
And then looking at other people's charts, my clients, my family, it was like, oh my gosh, if this woman wants to connect more with her feminine energy, the answer is right here with her moon. And I started being able to see things that I couldn't see before.
Hey friends, it's Jayan here. If you have been feeling really stressed out about the world lately, you are not alone. There's been enough crazy and fear flying around the internet that even I've been knocked off my rocker sometimes. But it's times like these that I'm really grateful for the tools I have to regulate my nervous system. I developed these tools for myself when I was going through the thick of it. My babies were young and I had a ton of repressed anger. And these tools helped me through other stressful times, including negotiating my own divorce, having difficult money conversations, and of course, the whole COVID experience. And I've put all these tools in a method I call the Authentic Self-Care Method. This is different than other self-care programs because it is a framework for you to find your special sauce when it comes to self-care. And let me tell you a secret. Step 1 is not take a bath, get a haircut, or go to the gym. Step 1 is regulate your nervous system. And that's exactly what we do inside the 3-in-1 membership. This powerful program includes focused journals and meditations you can do in just a few minutes, like the fight or flight session, the hippocampus session, which rewrites your ability to see new possibilities, and the vagus nerve session, which helps you regulate your whole body in a crisis. Using these tools, members have reported feeling more empowered, more expansive, and many experience relief from actual physical pain, all for less than $2 a day. So join the 3-in-1 membership now so you can learn these tools today. The world is not going to become less crazy. The only thing you can control is how you respond to it. The 3-in-1 membership will help you do that, so click the link in the show notes to enroll today.
Okay, but what about the 5th house and the 4th house? What about Leo and Cancer? They don't have rulers now. Like, they're left without rulership. And so then I was able to look at those signs and those houses, as well as the 6th house and Virgo, and look at the asteroid goddesses and start to kind of logically make sense of like who would fit best where. But it was also an intuitive process and a checking in with God, like, hey, did I get that right? Like, is that actually how that's supposed to go? And it came through that Hygieia rules the 6th house and Virgo, and that Vesta rules the 5th house and Leo, and that Ceres rules the 4th house and Cancer.
Which like makes so much sense. Like especially and it makes so much sense to me that such a feminine sign like Virgo is literally the maiden, like should be ruled by a feminine asteroid. But we better talk about what each of these signs, what they mean, and what each of the goddesses mean. So sorry, go ahead. But I just had to say, like, it makes so much sense.
Yes. And so let's start with the 4th house and with Cancer. So the 4th house is the house of home and belonging. It has a lot to do with your home of origin, but also the home that you've created for yourself as an adult. There's a lot of family stuff there. And then Cancer is a sign that is very nurturing and maternal, but also protective. And like the moon makes a lot of sense with that sign and house. But Ceres, in mythology, Ceres was the mother of Persephone or Demeter. Ceres and Demeter are the same. Were the mother of Persephone, and she was also like the goddess of grain, and she was connected to the fertility of the earth. And when her daughter Persephone was taken by Hades into the underworld, she grieved so much that the entire earth stopped bringing forth food and people were dying. Like motherhood was so important to her that she was destroying the world in her grief at no longer having her child. And she is connected to grief, and grief is very connected to love, and especially love that knows no conditions. Um, like grief and love are two sides of the same coin. And so Ceres being over that realm of nurturing and protection and even food, Ceres is very connected to nourishment, which the most powerful nourishment we experience in our formative years, and it's in our home, and even before that it's in the womb of our mother. And so Ceres just felt so perfect for that kind of womb energy that is connected with Cancer and even that fourth house. Did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
No, yeah, that's so perfectly explained. Like it is so beautiful. I also find in my locational astrology, when people want to feel like they're at home, and like feel peace at their home or feel connection to their land, I often look for Ceres lines for them. I look to where is Ceres, because she will let people feel nourishment. She will let people feel at home. And also I think she's very connected to ancestry. That's what I found in a lot of my sessions, which the fourth house is your ancestors, your parents. It's very connected to home and family. So it makes complete sense to me that she would be in charge of that piece. And like she is the supply chain, right? And mothers are the original supply chain. Like they are mothers, like make everything happen. And so I just think this connection is incredible, and it checks out. It checks out in my work, not only just in regular like astrology readings, but also in locational astrology and other places that I've used it. So I've really loved that. And also I'll ask you at the end, because I really do want to ask you some more questions about the moon ruling feminine energy, but let's save that and we'll come back to it. So yes, let's continue on to the fifth house.
Okay, so the fifth house and Leo, ruled by Vesta. So this one was one that I was like, are you sure? Like, is this really, like, did I get this right? Because at first it didn't quite seem to fit. Because Leo energy is very much this show up and shine energy. It's very connected to this childlikeness. It can also be childishness. There can be a certain selfishness, but there can also be a playfulness and this like royalty. Leo's connected to royalty. And that fifth house is the house of creations, and that includes children, and it includes play and recreational activities. And there are connections to sex as a form of play as well. And Leo's very connected to expressing yourself from the heart. And so I was like, Vesta? Really? Because Vesta's connected to like the Vestal virgins and like keeping the temple flame alight all the time. Like, what? And as I pondered and studied Vesta more, it's like, okay, well, Vesta's connected to sacred sexuality, this inner core of sexual creative energy that exists and that you can tap into regardless of whether you are engaging in a sexual activity. And Vesta's connected to keeping the light of hope alive and hospitality. And hospitality incorporates play as well as rest, as well as whatever work has to be done so that people are well taken care of. And I had a conversation with a friend, and I guess you could call him a colleague as well, a fellow astrologer, who has a lot of Leo placements. And we were discussing Leo energy, and he's like, have you ever noticed that a lot of people who have significant Leo placements, they like feel responsible for other people. They feel like they're the only one who can do it. This thing that there's this something that they have to do because nobody else can do it. And I was like, oh my gosh, my South Node is in Leo, and I feel that to my core, like especially in my family of origin. And so after I had that conversation with him, I was like, okay, Vesta feels incredibly responsible for the well-being of other people, but she's also this fire maiden. There's this playfulness and this potential for destruction that can come into play because she is straight fire. It's like, okay, well, Leo is straight fire. And that fifth house, that creation energy, regardless of actual acts of sexual, like actual sexual acts, there's that creation energy. And that's what Vesta is. She's that flame of creation. Um, and so even though Vesta at first didn't quite feel right, the more that I have sat with the idea and the more I've looked at people's charts, the more I have realized, like, okay, this fits. This is a maybe different expression of Leo and fifth house energy than maybe most people typically talk about, but this fits.
Yeah, I think it does. I also was thinking about how Vesta has this energy of commitment, like being totally devoted, right? Devotion energy. And also like Vesta to me is also like, what is your sacred fire within? Like what lights your sacred fire? What makes you burn up inside? And I do think that that speaks to Leo's fixed energy, right? It's a fixed
Yeah.
sign. Yeah. And it really brings that commitment, right? Like Leo can be like, I'm going to commit to this dance routine, right? Like to my core, like I'm going to commit to doing the
Yeah.
things. And Leo is kind of very much like, I am in charge here, right? Like when an Aries and a Leo get in a little tiff, right? They're both leadership. All the fire signs bring leadership in their own way, but Leo will be like, I am here, I am in charge. And they really commit to things and they commit to shining. And we've talked about this before, but no one, the Vestal Virgin bows to no one, right? Everybody bows to the Emperor, but the Vestal Virgin bows to no one. She has her own deep leadership, especially. She's also connected to 40-year cycles. Anyway, that could be a whole other topic we could get into, but I think like that piece of commitment and lighting your inner flame is like a very Leo thing. And I do find that also goes with Leo's tendency to be like, look, it's like this or like this, like it's right and it's wrong. And like, here it is in this discernment piece of like, I know, right? Like I know what to do and I know what's right. And that sometimes can come off a little judgy here and there, but is
Yeah.
but like they have this great discernment piece. And I think that Vesta is a really lovely piece for that.
Mhm. Well, and with Leo, there can definitely be this element of performance. And even Vesta, there's this performance. It's almost like this performance as an ordinance, performance as a service, performance as joy, but also as a service to humankind. And I genuinely think that people who perform and love it, that on some level they view it as a service, that they are serving humanity by being on that stage or doing this thing or showing up in this way that makes them very visible. And it's not necessarily about them, even though it is. It's like, it's about me so that you can have a positive experience.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what about the sixth house? What about Virgo? Let's talk
And
about it.
Virgo. So Hygieia is an asteroid goddess that isn't as well known or as well recognized as the other three asteroid goddesses that I've talked about so far. But she, in mythology, Hygieia, I'm trying to remember her father's name. Anyway, she is the daughter of a god associated with medicine and with healing. And she, in particular, is associated with hygiene, hygiene, and this idea of like doing things that prevent illness to then encourage wellness. And I had only been studying astrology for maybe a year when I was introduced to the idea that, oh, hey, some people think of Hygieia as the actual ruler of Virgo. So that wasn't new to me. That had been planted years prior, just that some astrologers think of Hygieia as the true ruler of Virgo. But when I really started diving into this work of resonant astrology, it was like, okay, let's really look into that. Is she? Is she the ruler of Virgo? Is she the ruler of the sixth house? And Virgo is a very purifying energy. There's this focus on purification, which can come across as perfectionism. But there's this underlying purity of motivation in the highest expression of Virgo. And there's attention to detail. And I think of Virgo as kind of like this nurse energy where it's like, okay, you've got this wound and it's festering. And I know it hurts, but we got to clean it out. And I can't be so connected to your pain and your emotion that then I can't do my job. So I'm going to be kind and I'm going to be loving, but I'm going to get the job done. And it may not look very kind because you're in pain. So let's clean this out so that it can heal properly. Like, that's Virgo right there. It's just like, let's get the thing done so that you can be better, so that you can be well. And Hygieia is very much in that same realm of like, let's take care of things so that you are not miserable. Let's purify things so you never get sick in the first place. And this isn't just physical illness, it's all possible disease, lack of ease. And Hygieia is sometimes referred to as the holistic healer, just this idea of whole being wellness. And then that sixth house, it's connected to day-to-day routines and health and work and being of service. And Hygieia just makes a lot of sense to me there as well, because to truly maintain wellness, you do have to do stuff every single day. And sometimes it's stuff that's just kind of boring or not enjoyable. But if you don't do it, you're going to pay for it later. Yeah. Do you want to add anything to that, Julie?
Oh, yes. All the Hygieia thing. All the Virgo thing. It's so funny because my mom has Hygieia right by her sun. And before you even told me this, I would often say, like when people would ask me about Hygieia, I would say she has a very Virgo type energy. She feels like Virgo because she does. She has that poignant, purifying, like get it done, pick it out, and this very logical thinking, that nurse energy. That's all her. My mom is a nurse, by the way. She also is she's the cutoff. She was born shortly after the change into Libra, but she's a double sign, and she's got Hygieia right next to her sun. And man, you would believe every person I meet is like, is your mom a Virgo? And I'm like, no, but she's got Hygieia right next. You know, she thinks she's a Virgo. She thinks she's a Virgo hardcore. She does.
That Hygieia.
That Hygieia, she'll get you. She really will.
Oh,
but I love that you point out this holistic well-being, because I do think, as much as we talk about Virgo being in the details and getting into the details and being detail oriented, to be able to get into the details, you have to also see the holistic picture, right, of what's going on. That's what makes someone a good editor, is not just being able to say, you spelled this word wrong, but to make comments like, how does this contribute to the story as a whole, right? Like, how can we edit this in a way that works? Purifying energy being really important. And I think Hygieia really fulfills that role and can teach us a lot about our own well-being. Whenever people would talk about Mercury being in charge of Virgo, I'm like, yeah, I get it. And that like Virgos really pride themselves in being logical and practical and smart. But like Mercury's not really like that, not that he's not smart or anything like that, but he is much more about, I'm here to send you messages and I'm here to like talk. He's very Gemini. He's very, very Gemini energy,
He is very Gemini. He does have some connections to Virgo that lots of people don't know about. Like he was a male midwife.
Oh, yes.
Like,
yes.
He would help with midwifery, but he was a male. But also in some mythology it was questioned, like, okay, well, was he male or was he female, was he both? And so Mercury is a really fascinating, super fascinating character in all of this, and is actually still part of the ongoing unveiling of resonant astrology, as like God has had me ask myself questions about, like, okay, does Mercury need to be taken out of rulership of Gemini, or does he need a co-ruler, because Iris is like his feminine counterpart, but he has kind of been considered both masculine and feminine, and that like your Mercury, like what side he goes on depends on, like, is it a day chart or is it a night chart, like. So this is an ongoing, I guess, revelation, you could say. There are still some things that are getting ironed out, especially around Mercury and that third house, which is actually the house of the goddess and Gemini. So I don't have all the answers yet, but things are still coming through, and it's very, very fascinating.
It is. It has been so fascinating to watch you work with it too, and to see like coming up and researching and learning so many things about it. I do. Is it all right with you if we talk a little bit about Iris? I don't know. Even if she doesn't end up being that ruler, I think it's a good thing to kind of look at, because for me, when I looked up where Iris was in my chart, it just really fit. It really made sense for me. So maybe we could talk about what role she might play.
Yeah, so Iris in mythology was a messenger goddess, and she would send messages and travel via the rainbow. And she, I'm trying to remember, it's been a while since I've reviewed some of her mythology, but she has some like very significant roles that she played that tend to get kind of like glossed over. Like, so mythology changes over time. Like, we don't have the original mythology of Greece or of Rome. We have what's been edited by people in power. And so some of what we know about the female deities has been edited by people who didn't want women to look powerful for one reason or another. And you have to dig even deeper to see some of the ways that these goddesses were actually as equally as powerful in these stories as the male gods. Um, but Iris is very connected to that, like hope, because it's the rainbows after coming after a storm. There's a hope component, there's a communication component, there's a far seeing, like being able to discern things far off component that's part of Iris, that makes her a possible candidate for being connected to Gemini in the third house, that house of communication, that sign of being able to see both sides of the coin. um, Iris is also connected to water, and water as a prism, creating that rainbow. So there's a lot of feminine elements, and I don't know. I don't know yet whether she takes Mercury's place or whether she co-rules with Mercury or if she has some other significant part to play. But she feels very much like she's connected to intuition, whereas Mercury is connected more to logic. And so, even in that, logic is a more masculine form of discernment, and intuition is a more feminine form of discernment. So, it gets really interesting.
Yeah, I love this. I love the exploration. And when I was exploring her in my chart and where she was placed, I was like, "Oh, yes, that is how I communicate. Like that is how I, see things and intuit." And I wonder if like maybe she could be part of this communication that's almost channeled, or communication that's intuited by people, right? Like when we talk about this, sometimes we talk about this like speaking by the spirit or letting things flow through you.
Mhm.
That's kind of what I'm imagining she might feel like, because it's communication and intuition at the same time.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And the reason that I even questioned, like, oh, does Mercury not like rule the third house in Gemini, is that once I had my other rulerships in place, every single sign pairing, so like the sign that's 180 degrees across from another sign, they're a pair, and their houses are a pair. Every single one of them had like on one side a masculine ruler and on the other side a feminine ruler, except for the Gemini Sagittarius axis, which is also the third house, ninth house axis. So, like I said before, Gemini is sometimes considered masculine, sometimes considered feminine, um, but it just feels like there's something there that I haven't quite come to yet. And since since I think even in traditional rulership, like that third house has been called the house of the goddess for like ever. And the ninth house is the house of the god. And so there's a part of me that's like, okay, it makes sense for a masculine planet to rule the house of the god. Why is a feminine planet not ruling the house of the goddess?
Mm-hmm.
And wondering if maybe now, as we're becoming more open to feminine energy and integrating it more fully back into ourselves as a society and as individuals, maybe the goddess needs the house of the goddess needs a goddess again.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I will not hide my cards. I am on this. That is the side that I am on. I am on that side. I know we have other friends and colleagues who are not on the same page as that, but I think it does. I think Mercury could play maybe even a bigger role, as he does rule communication. He is the intermediary between all of these, and so perhaps Mercury, for people who don't know, he's also known as Thoth, and which in Egyptian hieroglyphs and things like that, if you've ever heard of Hermeticism, Mercury is in charge of all of that. He is Thoth, and Thoth is in charge of Hermeticism, and Hermeticism has this big thing about extremes, that everything is one. Light and darkness are the same, they're just on one axis, and that's kind of what he does. He's very much like that. When we talk about him having feminine and masculine roles, he is the axis. He works as the axis in between, and that's a little bit about what Hermeticism is about. So that's why I'm kind of leaning that maybe he has a different rulership, just like the sun and the moon have a different rulership, and we are just not quite sure what that would be. And maybe he rules axes. I'm not sure what that would look like, but
That's an intriguing thought, that
yeah.
he rules the axis.
Yes.
Because like, even if Mercury is taken out of rulership of a sign and house for resonant astrology, he won't be getting demoted, because like Julie said, he is very important. And Mercury was the messenger for the gods. He was the intermediary between the gods, but also between the gods and man. And Mercury was also a psychopomp. If you don't know what a psychopomp is, they deliver you to the underworld. And there's so much symbolism in that.
So much.
So much. And the other psychopomp that maybe not most people, but people who are more familiar with Greco-Roman mythology, the other psychopomp that they're familiar with is Thanatos, the god of death. But Mercury somehow is this playful messenger of the gods, but also this person who delivers the dead to the underworld. Like, he's very nuanced, and he's also a trickster, and so he's not always what he appears to be. And honestly, I would not be surprised if I am led to this place where it's like, okay, Mercury is the ruler of connection or communication, or of the nervous system, or of something that puts him in a place near the luminaries, the sun and the moon, but not in the same realm as the rulers of signs and houses. Like, Mercury has a place. I'm just not convinced that it's the third house and Gemini rulership anymore.
Yeah. And when you were saying that, I was wondering about maybe speaking of accesses, like maybe he is ruling the access between feminine and masculine energy, like the way that those work together and how we can bring them together and how they can message between each other. I don't know. We're like, we're chatting on this podcast. We're like, we're figuring it out as we go. We're learning.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and something that keeps coming up for me as imagery is this concept of mother, father, child. Mother, moon, father, sun is Mercury, the child. And the symbolism in that.
I love that.
How, like, the moon can teach you about your inner mother, and the sun can teach you about your inner father. Does Mercury teach you about your inner child?
Oh, I love that.
So there's more coming. There absolutely is. There's more.
Oh, well, thank you so much for explaining so much of this for people in depth. And of course, this is completely new. No one else has heard this before or created this. So you're hearing it first here, folks, unless you're in our membership, and then you've heard some of it a little bit. Yeah. But besides that, if you're interested in learning more, that is a place that you could go, is checking out Feminine Alchemist, because that is where Kayelee spills all of her secrets and tells us so much. I do want to ask, do we have time? I want to ask you about the Eve point. Can we talk about it?
We have more time than I thought we did, because ballet got canceled tonight due to weather. So I do not have to take one of my children to ballet. So we're good for longer than we originally were.
Okay, perfect. Because I'm just like, oh, I'm loving it. I'm like digging into all these things. And I did want to ask you a little bit about the moon ruling feminine energy. as far as that, like, can we give a little tiny bit of a case study on, I mean, just like, let's say you have the moon in Capricorn, like how might that help you
Yeah,
to
yeah.
connect
So
to feminine energy?
the moon in Capricorn. Something interesting about Capricorn is that Capricorn is actually considered a feminine sign, even though most people who don't know that would probably consider it masculine, because there is this element of structure that's associated with Capricorn. But Capricorn is also very rooted and very grounded. And that is like feminine energy is this grounded, rooted energy. The earth signs are feminine, the water signs are feminine. And Capricorn is also very concerned with um I'm trying to think of the right way to phrase this. There's kind of this longevity piece, this piece of like, what am I leaving as a legacy? Um, that it reminds me of Cancer, its counterpart in this idea of like nurturing something. Like a mother gives birth and puts so much energy into something that will outlive her. Capricorn energy is actually very similar, but instead of birthing something from like inside the body, it's more a birthing from the mind or from the work of the hands. And so for somebody to have their moon, their ruler of their feminine energy in Capricorn, um, that can kind of lend to this sense of like really needing to be grounded to be feminine and needing an extra amount of safety and structure provided by masculine energy in order to fully express the flow of feminine energy. And now that can be an external source of masculine energy. That can also be you looking at your sun and saying, hey, sun, how can you support me in feeling more structured, more of a path for me to flow or a container for me to flow into? And where your sun is in Cancer, that's fascinating. There's kind of this juxtaposition of masculine and feminine energies where it's like, I don't know that you would really know what it's like to experience pure feminine or pure masculine energy. And I don't know that you have to. I think your masculine and feminine energies are intended to always be a mix, to always work together. And masculine and feminine energy always works together anyway for anybody. Like the whole goal is for them to be together creating something. But I think for you, um you're never going to be able to show up in just feminine energy and actually experience the life that you want to experience, or just masculine energy and experience the life you want to experience. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it really does. It's so interesting because that is like my whole life, right? Because I'm a full moon baby. I'm across the axis. The really interesting thing is my moon and my sun are flipped in many ways. Well, my moon is in the third house of the goddess, so she's very happy, and she's in her joy in the third house. And my sun is in the ninth house of the god, which he is very happy there, and that's his place of joy. So they're in their places of joy, but it's interesting because it's almost like they're inverted, because you would expect like the moon also, Cancer is her domicile. She loves being in Cancer, and like in traditional astrology, she rules Cancer, and but she's actually across from it instead. And the sun, might be more comfortable in Capricorn, where it's strong and it can be, more of that strength piece. But so my whole life is inverted basically. I went to law school to become an astrologer, and I think that like sums up my my entire life, right? Like I went to law school to become an astrologer, and I think that is what I provide. And I think even in our business, right, I tend to do that masculine piece of doing those like building pieces and allow you to do this like creative piece. But it's fun for me, I don't know, because of that Capricorn moon. Does that make sense? Maybe I'm saying
Yeah.
something
Yeah,
wrong.
no, absolutely. That makes sense. And everything that you just described with your sun and moon, um, it's like an echoing of that Libra and that Juno energy once again, because like if somebody is a Libra rising, then on their chart all their signs are inverted as far as the house that they would normally be associated with. They're in the opposite. Well, not normally be associated with, but be associated with as far as rulership goes. And so like it's like for your sun and moon, there's kind of that Libra element of like, okay, I'm used to this perspective, but I'm now getting to look from this perspective that makes it so you can see things in a way that other people just can't. It's like you have an understanding, or at least will get an understanding in this lifetime of the entirety of that axis. And that's very Libra, that's very Juno.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the balance, right? It's all about the balance. And I think I have felt like that about my life, that it's really about being able to see the whole spectrum and feel the whole spectrum and understand it and just sit with it. So anyway, that was my selfish detour for myself, but maybe that's a good example. Maybe that's a good example for people to kind of see like where, if you do have an earth sign, your moon is an earth sign, maybe plugging into a little bit of those things. It'll be different for every earth sign, but that I think that practicality piece will still remain and needing that extra structure. And so maybe if you are wondering about how this works, think about the elements and their qualities and, how does that apply to you with the moon? So thank you for talking about that. And let's talk a little bit about the Eve point and what it is and where did it come from?
All right, let's do that. So, as I was receiving all of this probably over the course of 2 years now, related to resonant astrology, I also found myself really looking into the moon and the mathematical points associated with the moon, specifically Black Moon Lilith and White Moon Selene, which is not what a lot of people think it is. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. But as I was learning all these things about duality and axis and like unity in duality and piecing together all these things with resonant astrology, I started diving into Black Moon Lilith. And a lot of people on the internet were saying like, oh, Black Moon Lilith is the point on the moon's orbit furthest from the Earth, which is true. But they were also saying White Moon Selene was the point on the moon's orbit closest to the Earth, which when I started looking at charts, I was like, that's not possible. Because if that were true, she would always be 180 degrees away, directly across from Black Moon Lilith. And on almost no chart I have looked at is that the case. So what is going on? Why is there so much misinformation on the internet about these subtle points related to the moon? And the mathematical points have been fascinating to me because they are subtle. They have to do with your energy body. They have to do with things deep within you. And they're very powerful, but like they're also easy to not pay attention to because they don't jump out at you like the sun does. But they underlie everything else. And so I was like, okay, I've got to know what is going on here, especially because I feel so drawn to the moon and understanding the moon and helping people connect with their own feminine energy through the moon. And so I started doing some research and discovered that White Moon Selene is actually a hypothetical second moon of the Earth that gets used a lot by some Russian astrologers. And she has a 7-year cycle, so it takes her 7 years to go through the whole zodiac. She is not the opposite of Black Moon Lilith, even though all over on the internet she's described as if she is. And I was like, okay, White Moon Selene is not the opposite of Black Moon Lilith, but it feels like there is an opposite to Black Moon Lilith. So I started doing even more diving through like the most random websites on the internet, reading blog posts of astrologers and all kinds of stuff. And I wish I could remember her name right now. But I came across an astrologer who shared a letter that she had received from a fellow astrologer. They were like writing back and forth and talking about Black Moon Lilith and talking about White Moon Selene, and this discrepancy that I had found on much of the information out there. And she essentially corroborated what I had already learned about what White Moon Selene actually is. But then she started talking about this idea of the point opposite Black Moon Lilith. And like in this letter with her friend, they were talking back and forth about this concept and describing how, like, okay, Black Moon Lilith is like the shadow feminine and unveiled feminine intensity and the aspects of feminine energy that we tend to, as a society, try to hide or control, but that are very powerful. And they were saying, like, okay, well, like the opposite point of that, it would make sense that that would potentially contain the aspects of feminine energy that maybe are more palatable, that we tend to accept more readily, maybe the aspects of feminine energy that are more open and receptive and maybe gentle, not necessarily less powerful, but just approach things differently. And in that letter, one of these astrologers said, and I would probably consider that point to be Eve, because if you think about mythology and religion, if you think about the story from like a Christian perspective, like Eve was part of the Garden of Eden. Adam had Eve and Eve fell, and depending on your background, you might think that was a good thing or a bad thing. But then in Jewish traditions, some Jewish traditions, there's this idea of Adam having a wife before Eve, and her name was Lilith, and she would not submit, and she ran off and she did her own thing. And I'm not going into depth because we've actually done an episode on Lilith that you can go back and listen to. But essentially, there is some, I guess you could frame it as mythology, if we think of mythology as stories that we talk about that help us make sense of the world. That there is a mythology of a first wife of Adam who would not submit. So this idea of feminine energy rejecting masculine energy. And then there's Eve, who in some ways maybe also rejected masculine energy, but did it from a different place than Lilith did. And so I started researching Black Moon Lilith, and then the opposite point, which I call the Eve point. So the point directly across from Black Moon Lilith in a particular chart, I call the Eve point. And I started interviewing people about their lived experiences as I looked at their charts and these positions on their charts. And I started looking at my own life, and I started looking at my kids' charts and my husband's charts, because even though these are feminine points, they absolutely are significant for men as well. They do play a part for men. But I started seeing this story kind of come into play over and over again of the Black Moon Lilith essentially being how we show up when we don't believe masculine energy will be there for us, and the Eve point being how we show up when we believe that masculine energy has our back. And together, these 2 points I call the feminine power line, because I believe and have observed that when we understand the full breadth of those 2 points, we become incredibly powerful in feminine energy. And that even though like Black Moon Lilith seems to be like the bad girl, she's also the energy that's like, I'm done with abuse. I will not be treated this way. I am finished, which is a very feminine energy thing. Feminine energy in power won't be abused. It will leave. It will be done. And so like Black Moon Lilith houses the parts of ourselves connected to feminine energy that we've rejected for one reason or another. But there's a ton of power there if we want to integrate that Black Moon Lilith. And then the Eve point is also powerful in that she's connected to this idea of faith and this trust that I will be provided for. Even if the men in my life fail me, even if the institutions in my life fail me, the universe will provide for me, or God will provide for me. And there can be a lot of strength there, because if you think about the Eve story from a more, I guess, positive slant, you could think of Eve um, as a woman who acted on a little bit of knowledge and maybe on a hunch, maybe on some intuition, to step into the unknown, trusting that somehow it would be okay. And that she did so, and then became a mother, ultimately, the mother of all. And there's an echo of that in the Eve point energy. The sense of like, will you trust that the universe has your back, that God has your back? Will you take a step into the dark and know that you'll somehow be okay, even if it's really scary for a while? And then Black Moon Lilith is like, I'm done being mistreated. I'm going to burn it down. And we need both of those. We need both of those. And we need them to be a part of us. And so that is a huge focus of my research more recently, is making sense of these lunar points and how they connect to our moons and how they connect to our internal worlds, and even how we were mothered and nurtured as infants and even pre being physically born. There's just so much there that relates to our psyches and relates to our shadows and relates to things like self-sabotage and the things that we just can't seem to get over no matter how hard we try. Those lunar points are a huge part of that, and a huge part of healing, and a huge part of empowerment. So now that I've gone on a little bit of a tangent.
No, it's beautiful. I love it whenever you talk about this. And, you know, we had a whole, just to reiterate for people, if you want to know more about Lilith and her placement and what she means, please go back. I think it's episode 6. It's called The Bad Girl of the Zodiac. Go find that. We talk all about her in depth. And I am sure we are going to do a whole episode on the Eve point, what she is, how we can reconcile, you know, how she helps us, exactly like Kayelee described. But this is just a little bit of a teaser for all of you to start looking at your own charts and what you can learn from her. And as Kayelee does more research and as we learn more, we'll be able to provide more of this information. But I've loved this because it just shows that our knowledge is ever evolving. And just what can curiosity do for you? You know, astrology is a system that's thousands and thousands of years old, but here you are creating this twist that will help so many women. And I feel like it's helped me and not just women, obviously men as well. Men are just as important in this, just like, you know, Saturn is a masculine planet. He affects all of us equally as we go through our Saturn returns. All of these, asteroids will affect everyone. Resonant astrology affects everybody. But I do think centering the feminine more is just bringing so much to the world. And so I'm just like so grateful and excited for this creation. And just think if you had never gotten curious and asked questions about this, like this is so huge, and it's part of our school and our curriculum and everything that we do. And those women who are doing it are being touched by it. And how many times do we fail to ask questions about these things and about systems? So I think that is so beautiful. I've loved working with Lilith. I've talked about it multiple times. She has been so helpful, and working with the Eve point as well, helping me know where I can trust and how to trust and what energy to trust, which is in Libra, of course. She is, which is so funny because anyway, we can talk about it later. I never thought I would ever be described as similar to Libra in any way, shape, or form, but it is interesting how, you know, everything comes together. So, Kayelee, it's your birthday when this airs. It is your birthday. So, what wisdom? I was going to do a whole thing where I was going to tell you about your solar return chart, but maybe I'll do that privately. We can talk about it. I did run it, though. I run mine from your natal placement, just so you know, from your birthplace. And also, of course, I do it in whole sign. So you have a Capricorn moon this year. So good thing we talked about Capricorn moons. I tricked you into thinking that was about me, but it was really about you.
It was really about me.
Yeah. But you have a great year. You've got Pisces, everything in Pisces, and your midheaven there, all at the top of your chart, which I'm so ecstatic about. And for everybody else, we will do this ourselves. We'll have our own little soiree about Kaylee's birthday and what's coming up for her in her year. But I would love to hear, just as we're closing out, any wisdom you have for us, anything else you want to say about this, but more particularly, like also, what are you looking forward to this year? What was the last year like, last year wrap up for you? Like, what was your experience? And then what you're looking forward to from this birthday onward. Then I'll double check your chart to see if it's true.
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding.
As you were talking about last year, I'm like, man, what happened last year? I feel like so much. So yeah, last year, so for many years now, I felt like I was searching for something, that there was something I needed to be doing, but I couldn't quite pin down what it was. And I was doing different business things, and I was studying lots of different things, and felt like I just kept failing because it just was not working out the way that I wanted it to. And then this last year, it's like everything coalesced in meeting you, Julie, and then in us forming Feminine Alchemist together. This dream of a school that I was like, oh, someday I will have a school and I will teach astrology and I will teach these other things and it will be beautiful and it will be connected to the feminine. And then I met you and we started talking about things, and you're like, what if we did a school? And then I sat with it for like a month, and then I was like, what if we did a school? And here we are, and we have a school, and we have this beautiful podcast with Jayanne, and I did not know what was being prepared for me until it was here. And even then I didn't know. It's now starting to really sink in, like, oh, this was being prepared. Like all the experiences that I had where I thought I was failing at business, or I wasn't figuring out my niche, or my who I should be marketing to, or what service I should be offering, like it was all leading to this. And so I'm really excited this year for Feminine Alchemist to grow, for the podcast to maybe get some more awards. That was so exciting. And then like on a more personal note, like I'm really looking forward to shedding more of the things that aren't actually me, that I've been carrying for too long. And there are some exciting changes coming to my family that I'm looking forward to. And when I pulled my solar return chart in the way that I do, which I do from location at time of solar return, and I use Placidus. So Julie and I do things a little differently, but there's validity in both ways of doing it. I saw that my sun was in the 9th house, which the last time I had a 9th house sun, I was like given so many opportunities, and women in particular who were in positions of power and prestige like championed me. And so I'm kind of looking forward to that possibly happening again, of just this expansion being fueled by other women believing in me and me believing in myself.
I love all of that. I think it's beautiful. And I think about that with looking at it at whole sign with your sun in the 10th house, how beautiful you're shining in your career, shining in your reputation, other people building you up, having your north node there too in the midheaven. So I think that's just lovely. I love all of your wisdom. I feel so grateful for you. I mean, I know Jayanne is extremely grateful for you. We're just so grateful for all the work that you do, like the creativity you bring, your expertise, your cute smiles and glasses. People don't know this. Maybe people don't know this, but everyone, Kayelee is a Disney princess. So if you ever if you didn't know, now you know. She is our resident Disney princess. She is amazing. And we are so excited to celebrate you and all your creations. Everything that you've been doing is fabulous. I look forward so much to our work this year, to this podcast this year. And I hope everyone wishes you the best happy birthday. You light up our lives, and we love you.
Thank you so much. I love you too, you and Jayanne, and all of our listeners. Thank you so much for supporting us. Like, honestly, it has been so humbling and so beautiful to see how many people are listening in each week and to hear your comments. Some of you have reached out to us individually, and then also you can text us through Buzzsprout, and even that recognition from Wolf Media. Like, it's just so honoring.
Mhm.
And it feels kind of humbling to be part of the conduit for this information, for the experiences that we have here on the podcast. I love it so much.
Yes. Yes. Thank you. And thank you for being here. We are blessed by you. We're blessed by our listeners. So all of our listeners, go tell Kayelee happy birthday. We love to hear back from you. And if you want to learn more, once again, and reach out to Kayelee, you can find her at femininealchemist.com. Hello at Feminine Alchemist. You can find her at ourlunation.com if you would like. To reach out to us in the school on Instagram, and everybody tell her happy birthday, and we just hope you have the most magical week. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as we did. Please make sure to give us a 5-star rating wherever you are listening and share with someone you know. See you next week.